Picture this, an endless sweep of white under a pale winter sky. The wind doesn't just blow, it bites, slinging icy flecks that prick the skin and turn breath to frost in a heartbeat. Temperatures plunge to the kind of cold where metal stings and quiet carries for miles. This was winter for native peoples across North America long before radiators, insulation, pantry aisles, or weather apps. And yet, they didn't merely endure it, they built rhythms, technologies, and traditions that let them live well through the coldest months. Tonight, we're going to walk into that world together. From the open, blizzard-swept grasslands of the plains to the forested northeast, from coastal cedar country to desert mesas, and, eventually, into the deep Arctic, you'll see how survival wasn't an accident. It was the result of deep ecological knowledge, deliberate planning, and community systems that treated winter as a season to respect, not fear. First, let's talk about the problem winter actually posed. On the Great Plains, it wasn't unusual for the thermometer had anyone been carrying one to hover 20, 30, even 40 degrees below zero. Blizzards erased the horizon and stacked snow into drifts taller than a person. In the northeast, the dense woods glazed over with ice, and lakes locked solid. Game thinned out or migrated. Some animals hunkered down and vanished into burrows. Plants went dormant. Daylight shrank. The calendar wasn't just marked by cold. It was defined by scarcity, scarce time, scarce light, scarce calories. So the question becomes, how do you keep people warm, fed, and hopeful for months on end when the landscape offers so little? The answer starts with shelter, because if your home fails, nothing else matters. In the northeast, the Haudenosaunee, often called the Iroquois, perfected the longhouse, a sturdy communal structure framed with saplings and dressed in overlapping sheets of elm bark like giant shingles. These weren't temporary huts, they were engineered buildings. Strong lashings held the frame. Bark layers shed sleet and snow. Woven mats of reeds and corn husks added insulation. Fires burned in a central row of hearths, and smoke drifted out through adjustable roof vents you could shutter during storms. A longhouse might stretch 60 feet or more and stand 10 feet high, sheltering multiple families in a shared, warm interior. Heat, labor, food, and stories pooled together here, winter weather on the outside, community weather on the inside. Head west onto the plains, and you'll find a very different, equally brilliant answer: the tipi. Lakota families, and other plains nations, used long lodge poles and carefully sewn buffalo hides to create a portable, conical home that laughs at wind. The shape slips gusts rather than catching them. An interior fire warms quickly. Smoke flaps regulate airflow. In winter, camps often settled into protected valleys, and families banked snow around the base of the lodge. That sounds counterintuitive until you remember snow is full of trapped air, its insulation. Packed properly, it turns a drafty seam into a snug seal. A tipi could be broken down and moved as needed, but in a good winter camp, it became a reliable, efficient refuge. Travel southwest and the strategy shifts again. Ancestral Puebloan peoples built with earth and stone adobe bricks, clay, straw, or carved dwellings into cliff faces that captured winter sun and dodged prevailing winds. Thick walls absorbed warmth during the day and released it slowly at night, stabilizing indoor temperatures when the desert sky turned sharp and cold. Small doors and windows slowed heat loss. Interior hearths and shared walls meant you weren't heating the whole world, just the spaces where people actually lived. In this architecture, the landscape wasn't a threat, it was a partner. But a warm home is only part of the equation. Winter is a months-long test of logistics, and food planning is where that test is either passed or failed. Tribes in the northeast were masters of storage. The three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, weren't just a poetic trio, they were a complete strategy. Corn was dried on the cob or ground into meal. Beans were shelled, dried, and stored. Squash was sliced into rings and hung to dehydrate. All of it went into well-lined underground pits that stayed cool, dry, and safe from pests. Meat deer, fish was smoked or dried. The result lasted for months without spoiling. On the plains, the buffalo was food, fuel, and fabric all at once. After the big autumn hunts, families sliced meat into thin ribbons to air dry or smoke, rendered fat into tallow, cracked bones for marrow, and turned hides into everything from warm robes to weatherproof tipi covers. A powerhouse trail food called pemmican dried meat pounded together with fat and sometimes berries delivered compact, long-lasting calories that could be rationed with precision when storms pinned camps down. In the Pacific Northwest, where rain and chill replaced brutal cold, the winter diet leaned on salmon. Families processed massive runs in summer and fall, filleting, smoking and drying fish in cedar plank houses where the scent of alder smoke soaked into everything. The high oil content made salmon an ideal winter fuel. Berries were dried or pressed into cakes, seaweed was harvested and stored, clams and mussels could still be gathered on winter tides. Food wasn't just put away, it was put away with a system that balanced taste, nutrition, and shelf life. Clothing was the other half of the warmth equation, and here the material science is as elegant as the architecture. In the Northeast, soft, brain-tanned buckskin became leggings, shirts, and moccasins. Tough, flexible, and breathable. Waterproof beaver pelts kept hands and heads warm and shed slush. Fur linings and cattail fluff added insulation where needed. On the plains, buffalo hair robes were worn fur-in for maximum heat. Moccasins were double-layered and stuffed with dried grass. Up in the Arctic, where we'll spend time soon, caribou hides with their hollow hairs created parkas and trousers that rival modern gear in warmth to weight. Seal skin made boots that shrugged off wet and wind. Stitch by stitch, families produced tailor-made systems. Soft inner layers for comfort, fur for insulation, tough outer shells to block the elements. It's the same layering logic you'll hear in any cold weather guide today, perfected centuries ago. And then there's the social technology, the way community itself becomes insulation. A longhouse or winter camp isn't just a building, it's a network. Heat is shared, labor is divided, elders teach, children fetch kindling. Someone tends the fire while someone else mends a snowshoe or scrapes a hide. Ceremonies and storytelling nights weren't luxuries. They were emotional survival, structures that kept minds focused and spirits steady when the wind tried to wear people down. Games sharpened skills. Songs and rituals renewed purpose. In these months, connection was as crucial as calories. If you're starting to see a pattern, you're right. Every detail served a double duty. The tippy slope beats the wind and speeds set up. The cliff dwelling saves fuel and defends against storms. The storage pit preserves food and protects it from scavengers. The robe you sleep under might also become the sled that hauls your firewood. Nothing was single-purpose because winter doesn't reward single-purpose thinking. So here's where our journey turns. We've set the stage. The threats, the answers, the way shelter, food, clothing, and community locked together like fingers around a warm cup. Next, we'll head into landscapes where winter stops being a season and becomes an environment unto itself, the high Arctic. There, with the Inuit, we'll watch snow turn into architecture, blubber into light, and silence into a field guide. We'll see how a dome of snow can be warmer than a canvas wall, how a lamp the size of your hand can heat a room, and why understanding ice is as vital as understanding fire. For now, imagine yourself inside a winter home bark walls creaking softly in the wind, or a hide cover whispering as it settles. A small fire steady at the center, breath no longer freezing in front of your face. Outside, the world is hard and pale. Inside, it's orange and human. Survival, here, is not luck. It's design, knowledge, and care layered together until they feel like warmth. When you're ready, we'll step farther north and learn how to make a house out of winter itself. Step north until trees give up, until wind and light write the only lines on the horizon, and you enter a world where winter isn't just a season, it's the architecture, the pantry, the calendar, and the rule book. This is Inuit country, stretching across Alaska, Canada, and Greenland, where temperatures can fall far below zero and stay there long enough to make steel brittle and conversation short. Here, survival never meant resisting the cold. It meant cooperating with it, understanding it the way a sailor understands currents so deeply that snow itself becomes a building block and breath becomes fuel to be rationed. Let's start with a structure you already know by name but might not fully appreciate. The igloo. Forget the cartoon version. Think precision engineering done in the white quiet of a polar afternoon. You pick your snow with care, hard-packed wind slab, not fresh powder. Too loose and it won't hold a blade. Too dense and it won't insulate. Using a long snow knife bone, antler, or later metal, you cut the snow into blocks and arrange them in a rising spiral. Each block leaning just slightly inward, so the weight of the dome presses itself into stability. There's no mortar. The cold makes the bonds. Your last block, the keystone, locks the shell under tension. You carve a low tunnel entrance that dips below floor level so cold air sinks and stays near the door while warmth collects at the sleeping platform you've shaped above it. You line the interior with caribou skins. You set a small stone lamp, the Quillic burning seal blubber that brightens the dome and warms the air just enough to soften the chill without melting your walls. Snow's trapped air makes it a world-class insulator. Outside, it can be cruel. Inside, it's survivable, often hovering around freezing to slightly warmer cozy when you're wrapped in fur and sharing space with family. The brilliance is not just the igloo, it's the system that surrounds it. A family might build a cluster, one for sleeping and meals, one for gear, a connecting tunnel to keep the wind out and kids safe in whiteouts. When the season changes, nothing goes to waste. Blocks break back into the snowfield, knives go back into packs. Knowledge, not materials, is the lasting asset. Now, about that lamp, the heart of the Arctic home. The Quillic is shallow and crescent-shaped. Its wick is moss or Arctic cotton, trimmed constantly so the flame burns clean and small. Blubber is precious, you don't squander it. A careful hand can run that lamp for weeks, adjusting the wick to balance light, heat, and fuel. The glow is soft, steady, and practical. A work light, a heater, a morale booster. It dries mittens. It softens sinew. It makes the igloo smell faintly of sea and smoke. A scent that means safety. Clothing here isn't fashion or even just warmth. It's life support. Caribou hides are legendary because the hairs are hollow, tiny thermos flasks that trap heat. You wear 2 layers, inner fur facing in, soft against the skin, outer fur facing out, to block wind and shed frost. Parka, pants, mitts, boots of seal skin or caribou, sometimes double-layered, stuffed with dry grass to wick moisture from sweat because wet kills quicker than cold. Stitching is high craft. Women sew with bone needles and sinew thread, and a single poorly sealed seam can be the difference between a long hunt and a short, dangerous one. Hoods are shaped to keep warm air around the face. Children's clothing is oversized for layering and growth, which is both practical and merciful in a place where daylight is a season, not a daily certainty. And then there's food. The Arctic's pantry looks empty to an untrained eye, but it's full of calories if you know where to listen. Seals are central. A hunter will stand for hours by a breathing hole, absolutely still, reading the snow with his ears and feet, harpoon line coiled, point ready. The moment's window is seconds long. When the strike is clean, nothing is wasted. Meat feeds families, blubber feeds lamps, skins become boots and lines, bones become tools. Caribou are the other pillar lean meat when fresh, nutrient-dense organs, waterproof hides for clothing. Fish Arctic char, among others, come through the ice with nets or bone hooks. In spring they come heavier and in numbers. And here's a detail that makes Westerners blink. Much of this is eaten raw or lightly warmed. That's deliberate. Fuel is scarce, and raw meat preserves vitamins, especially vitamin C in organ meats that prevent scurvy when sunlight is a rumor. Tools are beautiful in their purpose. The harpoon has a detachable, toggling head that anchors inside a seal so it won't slip free. The line is sinew or rawhide, strong and forgiving in the cold. The snow knife is both saw and sculptor. The ulu, a woman's crescent knife. Skins, scrapes, chops, slices and shapes. Sleds kamutik run on wooden or bone runners, laced with rawhide, hauled by dogs whose paws write the Arctic's oldest routes into snow. Every ounce counts. Nothing bulky, nothing frivolous. And everything is repairable because the repair kit is a mindset, not a pouch. Navigation looks like magic until you learn the language. The wind sculpts snow into sastrugi sharp ridges that align with prevailing gusts. You can feel them with your boots in poor visibility, like braille for travel. Stars return by season, and when they don't, the wind is your compass. The snow's sound underfoot tells you density and drift. Stone markers inuksut rise from rock to signal passages, camps, good fishing, or dangerous ice. They don't move in storms, so people can. This is also where community practices show their engineering. Families cluster igloos and share meals from the same pot, egalitarian by design, so no one is one bad hunt away from catastrophe. Throat singing, sometimes playful competitions, sometimes lullabies, turns breath and rhythm into warmth the body can feel. Blanket tosses on stretched hides build laughter and balance games, that teach aerial awareness for hunting and break the gloom. A shaman might lead a small ritual to honor Sedna, the Sea Mother, because spiritual reciprocity is also risk management. Gratitude keeps relationships human and more than human in equilibrium. You'll notice a pattern. Nothing fights the environment head-on. Everything flows with it. The igloo tips the scales of physics. The clothing respects how moisture works. The diet respects what nutrients the land provides and in what form. The tools respect the energy budget of a body in cold. The social systems respect the reality that isolation is as dangerous as exposure. Now picture a hunt that doesn't go well because even mastery meets bad luck. What happens? Flexibility takes over. Hunters shift to char through ice holes. Sled teams angle for wind, scoured routes that save energy. A family trims the lamp lower, eats more bone marrow, shares across households, patches sealskin boots, so the next try isn't compromised by a wet sock. The plan B isn't a panic button, it's a normal part of the rhythm. If you've ever been taught the modern winter mantra, layer up, stay dry, eat fat, share heat, you've already learned an Inuit syllabus without the footnotes. Up here, those footnotes are lives lived, refined over generations of testing, teaching, and tweaking. Before we leave the Arctic, stand outside the igloo with me for a second. There's no tree line to soften the sky, no bird chatter, just the faint hiss of drifting snow, and maybe a far-off bark from a dog team. The lamp flickers inside, turning blubber into light. The dome holds. The gear is dry. The line is coiled for tomorrow. It's not comfort the way a modern house is comfortable, but it's competence. And competence feels like warmth. Next, we'll head south again to the open expanse of the Great Plains, another harsh teacher, different rules. There, the wind has more room to run, and the buffalo becomes winter's bank account. We'll step into a ring of typis in a sheltered valley, watch snow get used as insulation instead of obstacle, and see how mobility, storage, and ceremony thread people safely through the leanest months. When you're ready, we'll walk into that camp circle and let the plains teach their lesson. Walk with me out of the Arctic quiet into the open sweep of the Great Plains, where the horizon is a straight line and the wind has no fences. Winter here is a runner fast, loud, sudden. Clouds stack like distant mountains, then sprint across the sky. Cold arrives in a rush, and drifts build into low white dunes that shift overnight. You can't hide from weather on the plains. You have to choose your ground and shape your life so the wind works for you, not against you. Start in a winter camp, nestled in a river valley, cottonwoods rattling softly, tipis set in a great circle. Lakota, Cheyenne, Blackfoot, different nations with shared wisdom, knew where to put a camp long before a storm hit. You wanted a bend in the river that gave you water, trees for wood, and a bluff that shrugged off the prevailing wind. Scouts search those places in autumn, reading sign, where the snow will scour thin instead of drift deep, where buffalo might still pass, where deadfall lies thick enough to fuel weeks of small, steady fires. The tipi is the star of this landscape, portable, tough, fast to raise, and clever in the cold. Long lodge poles lift a hide cover into a cone that deflects gusts instead of catching them. A smoke hole at the top breathes. Flaps adjust to coax the draft. In winter, families bank snow around the base, instant insulation. Inside, buffalo robes pile thick on the floor, and a modest fire burns clean, its glow painting the poles and the faces around it. There's a logic to the interior. Sleeping space back from the door, storage deftly hung or stacked, tools where hands find them in the dark. The cold is kept small by organization and habit. Mobility is the plains strategy. You move to food, to sheltering terrain, to wood. The travois, two tipi poles lashed into a V with a cross-frame turns dogs, and later, horses into freight haulers. Winter loads are precise, balanced, and secured in rawhide. The point isn't just to move, it's to arrive with everything dry and repairable. A camp broken down at dawn stands again by dusk because everyone knows their part. Poles, cover, stakes, hearth, storage, done. Food is the other half of winter math. The buffalo is a season-long ledger meat, fat, bone, hide. Autumn hunts are communal and strategic. When terrain allows, people orchestrate a buffalo jump, guiding a herd toward a cliff or steep coulee where momentum finishes what planning began. But most years, winter meat comes from smaller, careful hunts. A few animals taken without spooking the rest. always mindful of the energy cost of pursuit. After harvest, women's work is alchemy thin ribbons of meat, dried in the cold air or low smoke, fat rendered into tallow, marrow scooped from cracked bones, everything sorted for how it will be used. Pemmican is winter's high-efficiency fuel. Dried meat is pounded into fibers, blended with hot, clean tallow, sometimes brightened with dried berries. Packed into rawhide bags, it keeps for months, travels effortlessly, and delivers more energy per mouthful than almost anything people could make by hand. Rationed smartly, pemmican stretches through storms, hunts, and journeys. It's trail food, camp food, emergency food, always there, always ready. Clothing is tuned to movement. A buffalo robe-worn fur-in traps heat. A buckskin tunic breathes during hard work. Leggings and mitts get layered as needed. Moccasins are doubled in winter, an inner liner and an outer shoe, stuffed with dry grass to wick moisture, because wet socks are a quick road to frostbite. Hoods and caps eliminate heat loss from the head. Scarf, like wraps, protect cheeks and noses when the wind picks up. Everything ties or toggles easily so you can adjust layers without taking off too much in the cold. Snowshoes aren't only for forests. On the plains, wider frames and sturdy rawhide lattices spread a hunter's weight across drifts that can otherwise eat a person waist deep. Trappers and foragers use them to check snares, haul wood, and scout for sign without burning twice the calories with every step. And when the snow crusts over after a thaw-freeze cycle, you move early or late, reading the surface with each footfall, choosing routes where the wind has planed the drifts hard and slick. Firecraft here is quiet and disciplined. Cottonwood isn't the hottest burn, but it's abundant. You split and dry what you can, and you start your fires small and close. On treeless stretches, buffalo chips, sun-dried dung become fuel that burns hotter than you'd guess, with little smoke if tended right. Tinder bundles live in someone's pouch at all times, kept bone dry in hide or bark. Flint and steel when they're available, bow drill when they're not either way. There's no try again later in a crosswind at 10 below. Sparks are shepherded like children. Water is as much a project as wood. Rivers freeze, but moving water stays beneath the ice. People chop a clean hole and skim slush, then keep the ice edge trimmed so no one slips and so tools don't freeze in place. Snow is melted when necessary, but only fresh, clean snow new fallen, away from camp paths and animal tracks. You learn quickly that eating snow lowers body temperature. You melt it first, sip warm, and share the cup. Hunting in winter is effort with a price tag. Stalking against the wind keeps your scent from blowing toward the herd. You scan for animal trails where drifts are broken, places where antelope or deer push through. Snares, rawhide loops set with care take rabbits and other small game without burning hunters' energy. You don't chase for pride. You turn back to camp when a day's math goes negative. Survival isn't a contest. It's a ledger where the columns have to add up. Inside the camp circle, winter is also a season of repair. Men rewrap bow grips and fletch arrows with feathers saved from fall. Women scrape hides smooth and soft. Quill work brightening practical gear with quiet beauty. Because beauty is morale, and morale is survival. Children learn by doing fetching water, twisting cordage, tending embers, because a skill practiced in calm is a reflex in weather. Ceremony gives winter its calendar. The Inipi sweat lodge might be held in a snow-walled hollow, a frame of willows, stones heated in the fire, songs moving breath and heat through the small dark space. Purification, yes, but also reconnection to the people beside you, to the land holding you. Stories do the same work. A knight's tale about white buffalo calf woman or a trickster's mischief teaches ethics, share food, respect power, face hardship with humor, and packs those lessons in a form that sticks better than an order ever could. Game's the moccasin game. Hoop and spear train focus, dexterity, teamwork, and they bring laughter loud enough to drown the wind for a while. Safety in storms is a choreography. If the sky turns iron and the air goes glassy cold, families secure covers, lay in extra wood, and mark paths between teepees with branches or stakes. Hunters travel in twos, agree on routes and return times, and carry a tiny world of backup in their packs. Pemmican, tinder, an awl and sinew for emergency stitching, a spare moccasin liner, small things that turn a bad hour into a survivable story. In whiteout, you don't wander, you wait. You dig a windbreak or slip behind a drift, turn your robe into a shelter, and let the world calm before you move again. When supplies tighten, the response is communal, not panicked. Pemmican portions shrink a little, nobody starves, nobody feasts. Bone broth goes on the fire, and the flavor brings people to the doorway with bowls and thanks. A family with a successful snare line shares. Next week it might be the other way around. There's an understanding that no one outlasts winter alone. The tipi circle itself is a symbol of that promise. Every door facing inward, every fire contributing to a shared glow. And when the cold breaks for a day and the sky turns absurdly blue, people move. Poles get relashed. A sled drags back fresh wood. A hunter's trail arcs to a ridge to read the snow, then back again. Children skate on bare boots across wind-polished ice, laughing hard enough to feel warm in their ribs. Those days are a gift and a reminder. Winter bends, but it doesn't forget you. You use the bend to make repairs, to restock, to remind the body what sun feels like against a cheek. If the Arctic taught us to cooperate with cold by turning snow into shelter, the plains teach us to cooperate with distance and wind by turning community into insulation and fat into time. The lesson here is simple and sophisticated at once. Travel light, plan heavy, eat smart, and keep your circle tight. From this river valley, we'll head for the forests of the northeast back into bark architecture and agricultural storehouses where the three sisters carry communities through the short days. There, winter life is less about chasing herds and more about managing pantries, repairing weirs in cold streams, and using story and ceremony to knit longhouse families into one warm organism. When you're ready, we'll push into the trees and feel how a wall of elm bark can make a storm sound like rain instead of trouble. Step with me off the open plains and into the northeastern forests where snow hushes the pines and ice plates the rivers in glass. Here, the cold bites differently. The wind is less of a freight train and more of a slow, steady thief, sneaking heat out through cracks if you let it. The Haudenosaunee, often called the Iroquois, and their Algonquian-speaking neighbors met this kind of winter with architecture that was both tough and communal, food systems that were planned months ahead, and daily rhythms that made dark evenings feel like a season of closeness rather than a sentence. Start with the longhouse, because everything else makes more sense once you feel how it holds the world at bay. Imagine a ribcage of saplings bent into high arches, cross-braced, then skinned with overlapping elm bark panels that shingle water and sleet away. Along the spine, vents open and close to manage smoke from a line of hearths. The floor is tamped earth, often laid with woven mats. You can hear weather in here without having to suffer it. Sleet ticks the bark, wind becomes a low song, snow thumps off the roof and slides away. Inside is warm, not in the way of a furnace, but in the way of a well-tended fire surrounded by people who know how to sit close without crowding. Multiple families live in one longhouse, each with its hearth space and storage loft. Heat pools and gets shared. So do chores. Children fetch kindling, elders tell the kind of stories that carry instructions inside them, and someone always has eyes on the fire. Because the longhouse is communal by design, you get security in more than one sense. More hands, more heat, more food ideas, more laughter when the night tries to stretch too far. Shelter comes in more than one model. Algonquian-speaking nations often used wigwams, domed frames of bent saplings covered with large sheets of birch bark or mats of cattail, smaller than longhouses, quicker to build, and perfectly suited to winter camps tucked near a frozen river. The logic is similar. Curved shapes throw wind, bark layers shed wet, interior fires warm quickly. In deep snow, people pack drifts against the base for instant insulation, the same trick you saw on the plains. Snow isn't the enemy, unmanaged air leaks are. If the longhouse is the body, food storage is the bloodstream. The three sisters' corn, beans, squash are a winter survival engine assembled piece by piece through summer and fall. Fields are cleared and tended together. Harvests are community workdays that look a lot like festival. Hands moving, voices up, baskets filling. Corn is dried, or ground into meal. Beans are shelled and spread to finish drying. Squash is split and sliced into rings that hang like garlands until they harden. Then everything goes underground. Storage pits are carved below the frost line, lined with bark to keep out damp and rodents, and capped carefully so snow loads won't collapse them. Each pit is a savings account for February. Locations are remembered and shared within the clan, not just as spots on the ground but as stories. In lean years, that kind of memory is the difference between a hungry week and a hard month. Meat completes the picture. Deer and moose taken in late fall carry more fat than in midwinter. Fish pulled from weirs or under-ice nets bring protein when you need it most. Smoking houses turn fillets and haunches into months-long insurance. Bones become broth that pulls minerals into the pot. Marrow is a dense energy boost. Small scraps become stews with cornmeal dumplings or dried squash. Nothing is wasted because waste is a summer luxury, and winter doesn't offer those. You can feel the intelligence in daily routines. Ice fishing is planned like a small expedition. An axe or chisel to open the hole, a wooden skimmer to clear slush, a short line with a bone hook. People work in pairs for safety. Nets under the ice are set and checked methodically. Fingers don't stay wet long. Warm breath is conserved the way food is. Traps and snares set along rabbit runs get checked at a pace that balances return with energy spent walking through powder. Snowshoes, light frames of ash or hickory with rawhide webbing, turn waist-deep drifts into passable ground. And the style of snowshoe can signal the forest you're in. Longer and narrower for straight-line travel, broader and rounder for maneuvering in tight trees. Inside, the craft work of winter feeds the rest of the year. Baskets are woven from split ash or sweetgrass. Bark containers are patched. Seeds are sorted for spring planting. Buckskin is scraped and softened into leggings and moccasins that flex with the ankle but block wind at the cuff. Mittens get lined with fur or stuffed with cattail fluff that traps warm air without adding much weight. Hats and hoods are cut to keep a pocket of heat around the face. A badly placed seam can leak warmth like a crack under a door. Careful hands make sure that never happens. Health is a practice, not an accident. Tea from evergreen needles brings vitamin C into a diet that's been dry for months. Steams and sweats clear lungs and lift moods. Slippery elm eases sore throats. Willow bark calms pain. The longhouse air is managed vents cracked when fires smoke. Mats aired on clear days. Damp corners dried with small, careful blazes because everyone knows the difference between warm and stuffy, and how the second can become coughs that chase sleep away. Winter safety is procedural. Storm signs are read before they become storm facts. A sky that sinks lower, air that goes brittle, wind that shifts subtly in direction. Paths between houses and store pits are marked with stakes or brush, so even a child can move safely in a whiteout. Ice is tested with a staff, and the sound it makes tells as much as the look-solid ice thuds. Bad ice sings and cracks. People teach children these things early with games that feel like play but encode critical skills. A guessing game with the peach stone set around the fire isn't just for fun. It trains attention and probability, the kind of thinking that helps with rationing and risk. Community life turns long evenings into a calendar. The midwinter ceremony, timed to the lunar cycle, draws families together to give thanks, to reset, to plan. There are songs that stir the air and remind you that breath has its own warmth. There's corn soup that tastes like patience and shared work. There are riddle contests and story cycles where creation and trickster tales ride the same voice, delivering moral lessons wrapped in humor. Laughter doesn't cost calories. It pays them back by making the dark feel shorter. Rationing is an act of care, not deprivation. A keeper of stores, often an elder woman, portions out cornmeal, beans, and dried meat, so the arc of the winter bends evenly to spring. Children and elders eat first. Workload adjusts. A hunter who comes back empty doesn't also miss dinner. Tomorrow is another try, and the camp needs him strong. Bone broth and dumplings show up more often late in the season, not as defeat, but as optimization, pulling every last bit of nourishment from bones and flour, keeping everyone steady without draining the pits. Maintenance is another quiet hero. Bark panels that shift in a windstorm get relashed before the next weather rolls in. Snow that stacks heavy on the roof gets pushed off with poles so the weight doesn't sag the frame. Paths are retamped to ice so boots don't punch through. If a vent door sticks, someone fixes the hinge now, not later, because later might be after midnight with sleet blowing sideways. And then there's the promise that runs under all of this. Winter ends. Even in February, you plan for the maple run. Tapping gear is counted and repaired. Birch bark containers are checked. The thought of the first sweet sap is a kind of medicine all its own, and even talking about it while you mend a net or scrape a hide changes the air in the longhouse. Hope is a tool, and people here use it deliberately. If the Arctic taught the art of cooperation with ice, and the plains taught mobility and fat management, the Northeast teaches the power of infrastructure. Houses that are heat engines, pantries that feed you on purpose, and communities that run like a good loom, every thread tight, every hand sure. From here, our path bends toward the Pacific Northwest, where winter is less about deep freeze and more about relentless wet, and where cedar and salmon become the pillars that hold the season up. When you're ready, we'll step into the cedar smoke and listen to rain on plank roofs while the smokehouse does its quiet work. Step west with me until the trees grow cathedral tall and the air tastes like salt. Winter here along the Pacific Northwest coast isn't the iron freeze of the plains or the knife-edge cold of the Arctic. It's wet, persistent, bone-deep. Rain needles sideways for days, fog drapes the inlets, and the world smells of cedar and tide. If other regions fight winter's temperature, the peoples here, Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian, Coast Salish, and neighbors, engineered their lives against saturation. Their genius isn't only warmth, it's dryness. Not comfort by accident, but comfort by cedar, salmon, smoke, and schedule. Start with the house, because if you can keep a room dry in this climate, you can do almost anything. Imagine a longhouse built like a ship turned inside out. Massive cedar posts and beams hewn with adzes, plank walls thick enough to shrug off gales, a sloped roof that sheds rain the moment it lands. Cedar is the region's miracle material, straight-grained, rot-resistant, easy to split, easy to carve, and forgiving in the damp. Planks can be lashed rather than nailed, which means walls are repairable, adjustable, and reusable as families expand or shift. Inside, the space is high and open, organized around hearths that burn low and steady, feeding smoke up and out through roof openings you can manage with shutters. That smoke is more than a byproduct. It dries the air, cures fish, conditions planks, and perfumes clothes with a note that says home, even out on a grey water day. Cedar does triple duty. The wood becomes beams, canoes, storage boxes. Bark becomes mats, capes, cradleboards, ropes. Roots become basketry, that's strong even when wet. Women strip bark in long, careful ribbons in spring so the trees live, a sustainable harvest that reads like a promise. We'll need you next year too. Mats woven of cedar bark line walls and floors as insulation. Rolled mats become quick partitions for privacy or windbreaks. Storage boxes, tight-fitting lids, square corners, keep smoked fish and berries dry. Cedar oil repels insects and mold. In a place where damp is a second weather, cedar is the primary technology. Food is a calendar, and here the calendar is written by salmon. In summer and fall, when the runs surge upstream king, sockeye, coho, you can feel the camps change gear. Men tend weirs and nets, timing set after set to tides and river clarity. Women and children work the lines, cleaning, filleting, and laying fish on racks inside or above the smokehouse. Alder or maple smoulders low. Days turn into strings of fish the color of sunrise. Experienced hands read the fillets give and sheen the way a baker reads dough. Too quick a fire and you seal moisture in wrong. Too cool and you risk mold. Just right and you seal in the season for months. The result smoked. Dried salmon is winter's backbone. Dense calories, salt and fat in balance, and a taste that turns grey days into something warm on the tongue. Berries fill the gaps and add vitamins the way sunshine does in other places. Salal, huckleberry, salmonberry picked in heavy baskets, dried on racks, pressed into cakes, sometimes mixed with fish oil for extra calories and better keeping. Seaweed harvested on low tides, rinsed in surf, dried into glossy sheets is more than garnish. It's iodine and minerals when days go short. Shellfish, clams, mussels, cockles can be gathered in most winter weather on predictable tides. Families know which beaches are reliable and mark them stakes, notches on shoreline trees, carved memory so even fog can't make them forget. Clothing is tuned to water first, cold second. Cedar bark capes, woven tight and layered, shed rain before it soaks in. Wide-brimmed, conical cedar hats throw streams off faces and keep heat where it matters. For colder days, sea otter and bear robes add insulation. Dog, wool, and mountain goat hair are spun and woven into blankets that warm by fire and bed. Footwear varies with Task soft-soled hide shoes for canoe landings and beach work, extra wraps when going inland through wet underbrush. The key is managing moisture. Change layers before they soak through. Dry gear by the low fire where smoke dries and preserves. Keep spares high on rafters, away from accidental splashes and curious dogs. Boats are houses that move, and canoes are the region's highways. Dugouts carved from single cedar logs by adze and fire are tuned to purpose. Ocean, going, river running, load carrying. Rims are hot bent to widen beam and lift bow and stern. Hulls are oiled to resist checking in the damp. In winter, canoes are pulled high and stored under eaves, a fleet sleeping under the same roofline as the people who will need them the moment the tide or weather allows. Paddles, too, are specific, broad-bladed, for quick control in tight channels, longer for open water. Even maintenance is ritual. Oiling day is a work party with stories, because a well-tended canoe is both safety and status. Fire in this climate is patient and planned. Wood is split when green, then stacked and roofed, so it can season between storms. The fire keeps small, hot core, slow feed, no waste. Wet cedar will smoke stubbornly, so dry heartwood is guarded like treasure, saved for cooking and lamp lighting. Kindling bundles live high under rafters, where smoke dries them to a reliable spark catcher. If you've ever tried to coax a flame from damp wood in a coastal wind, you know how much of a skill this is. Here, it's second nature from childhood. Health is moisture management too. Vent beds and mats on rare bright mornings. Cedar's resin fights mildew. Spruce needle tea adds vitamin C. Licorice fern roots soothe sore throats from breathing damp air. Sweat lodges, small cedar structures heated with stones, become winter remedies for tight lungs and cold, stiff joints. You can feel spirits lift afterward. And spirits matter as much as sinew when the sky stays low for a week. Community life turns grey into colour. Midwinter is potlatch season, when work slows enough to gather, when smokehouses sit full, when gifts circulate like warm air. A chief might host with blankets, painted boxes, fish, oil, carved spoons, wealth measured by what you can give, not what you can keep. Songs fill the longhouse, drums thrum, children's eyes go wide at masks that slip in and out of firelight. Potlatch isn't just feast and theatre. It's law and ledger, settling accounts and solidifying alliances that will matter when a canoe founders or a smokehouse leaks. Winter doesn't reward loners. It rewards networks. Safety protocols here are tidal. People move by schedules the moon writes on water. Clam harvests time to minus tides. River crossings time to slack. Canoe travel tight to shore when a squall threatens. Trails are marked with notches and carved signs that don't rot fast in cedar country. When rivers flood the banks, families shift to elevated sleeping platforms. Longhouse floors are kept clear for quick movement because high water in winter can arrive like an unexpected guest. Roofs get checked before any week of hard rain, leaks patched with fresh bark, gutters cleared with poles. It's maintenance as ritual again, fix it now, not later, because later is colder and darker. Rationing feels different in a land that seems abundant even in January, but it exists. Smoked fish is portioned, not plundered. Berry cakes are sliced thin. Seaweed is soaked and simmered into broths that stretch flavor and nutrition. Fresh harvests, clams, winter fish supplement stored goods, so the caches last to spring. If a smokehouse batch goes wrong, mold, a leak, a fire that ran too hot, families share to cover the loss, because by spring everyone will remember who stood in the gap. That memory keeps houses honest and communities stable. Craft doesn't stop for weather. In rain's steady percussion, carving continues. Canoe prows that cut water clean, houseposts whose faces hold clan stories, bentwood boxes steamed and folded from single cedar planks. Weaving continues, cedar bark softened and split finer than you'd think possible, mountain goat wool twined into blankets with geometric designs that store both heat and history. These are not hobbies. They're winter economies and mnemonic devices art that keeps people fed, clothed, and connected to ancestors when daylight is rationed. And then there's the promise of the first salmon. Even at midwinter, people talk about it the way northeastern families talk about maple sap. Nets are mended and coiled, weirs checked and repaired on a clear day. The first run will be welcomed with songs and careful first catch rituals, because gratitude is also management. Treat the fish as a gift, and you behave like a partner rather than a consumer. That mindset has a survival effect. Sustainable practices aren't slogans here, they're dinner later. If the Arctic taught us to sculpt warmth from snow, and the Northeast taught us to store summer inside earth and bark, the Pacific Northwest teaches waterproofing as a way of life. Houses that breathe and shed, fires that dry and cook at once, wardrobes that shrug off rain, and a social fabric that stays warm because gifts circulate like firelight. From cedar smoke and tide charts, our path turns south to the high desert and canyon country of the Southwest, where winter flips the problem again. There, night is knife cold and day is sun sharp. Water is a map, and earth itself adobe walls. Stone and sand becomes thermal battery and shield. When you're ready, we'll step into a hogan at dawn and watch how a single fire and an east-facing door make winter feel like morning instead of a sentence. Come south with me into winter air that cuts differently, so crisp it rings, so dry it preserves tracks for days. This is the high desert and canyon country of the Southwest, where night temperatures fall fast the moment the sun slips behind mesas and morning light pours back like molten gold. Here, winter is a daily swing between knife-cold dusk and shoulder-warming noon. The solution isn't just more heat, it's timing, orientation, and using the earth itself as a battery. Navajo, Apache, and Pueblo communities shaped winter to their calendars with architecture that stores sunlight, foodways that respect scarcity, and social rituals that keep minds steady when the wind whistles clean down a canyon. Start at dawn inside a hogan. The door faces east on purpose, so the first light enters like a blessing and a practical heater. Navajo hogans come in wood and earth forms, log frames stacked and notched, or cribbed poles plastered with packed earth. Sometimes stone joins the mix, always thick, always low, always bonded to the ground. In winter, that mass matters. Earth and stone absorb the sun's warmth through the day and give it back slowly at night, smoothing out the desert's wild temperature swings. Smoke from a center fire rises to a vent and carries the night's chill with it, and as the ceiling warms, the whole space settles into a steady, livable band of heat. You don't fight the cold, you choreograph it. Shift your eye to a Pueblo village, and the strategy rhymes in a different material. Adobe sun-dried bricks of clay and straw stacked thick, plastered, renewed, and cared for each season. Small windows minimize heat loss. Shared walls between rooms share warmth. Upper-level rooms bask in winter sun, while lower ones store it. Cliff dwellings, like those carved into soft stone in earlier centuries, show the same logic. Tuck into south-facing alcoves, shielded from prevailing winds, add small doors and vents. Let rock be both roof and radiator. In a place where wood is precious and winter nights are long, thermal mass is the quietest, smartest technology in the room. The Apache approach winter with mobility as a first principle. Wikiup's domed frames of gathered poles covered with brush, bark, grass or hides rise quickly, blend with the landscape, and shift with the needs of the hunt. Camp sits where the wind sits least, where rock walls reflect heat from a small, efficient fire back into sleeping space. Elevation is chosen carefully. Low enough for shelter, high enough to dodge flash flood danger after an unexpected storm. In this country, moving a few hundred yards can be the difference between a bitter night and a manageable one. Food here is the art of premeditated calories. The Navajo keep herds of sheep and goats, a living pantry that converts scrub into wool, milk, and meat. Mutton is winter energy, but it's used carefully stewed with dried squash, thickened with cornmeal, stretched across days. Corn, beans, and squash remain the backbone, ears dried on cobs and ground as needed, beans shelled, dried, and stored, squash sliced, strung, and hardened for months of sweet density. Storage vessels matter in a dry climate. Clay jars sealed with pine pitch. Woven baskets tight as drums. Stone-lined caches tucked into cool alcoves. Every container is a contract with February. Piñon nuts are the desert's gift-wrapped calories. Families harvest them in fall, when the scent of resin travels on the air, and store them in hide bags for winter, fat-rich, protein-dense, and portable. Agave hearts, roasted slow in earth ovens and dried, become winter sweet fuel you can chew on the trail. Wild seeds and dried fruits yucca, prickly pear are catalogued across a family's memory. The rule is simple. What the land gives in a burst, you stretch like taffy across the dry months. Water is a winter map. Springs are named and memorized, routes plotted by reliable seeps and tenages, natural rock basins that hold rain like cupped hands. The Apache and Navajo both carry water in pitch-lined baskets or clay. They know which canyons breathe moisture after freeze, which shady overhangs weep into a steady trickle. Pueblo fields set to catch runoff and held in place with stone terraces are repaired and readied during winter sun because the first melt is both a drink and a promise. Even the Hogan's placement respects water's stubborn habits. Slightly raised entry, shallow channels that carry storm runoff away from hearth and bed. Clothing turns the desert's extremes into a manageable spectrum. Navajo weaving wool dyed with plants and minerals produces blankets and mantas that are both warmth and wealth. A heavy, tightly woven blanket is a coat by day and bedding by night. Underlayers of soft buckskin keep the wind off without trapping sweat. For the Apache, buckskin is armor against brush and chill. Leggings flex for long treks. Moccasins get thick soles for rock and thorn, sometimes lined with rabbit fur when nights bite extra hard. Head wraps and simple hoods protect ears and nape where heat leaks fastest. The principle is the same one we've seen everywhere. Layer, vent, dry. Nothing stays damp next to skin. Firecraft in the southwest is low, clean, and stingy with fuel. Pinon and juniper burn hot. Fires are small circles of light rather than bonfires of bravado. Tinder is carried carefully shaved slivers of resin-rich wood, tufts of dry grass because there are days when wind reads your impatience and answers with a gust. In bright midday sun, a fire may be a tea and tool fire, not a space heater. At dusk, as cold drops like a curtain, it becomes the anchor of a room and a rhythm. Hunting pivots with season and snowfall. Deer and pronghorn demand stealth and patience. Tracks tell long stories on dusty snow. When larger game proves scarce, snares made of yucca fiber take rabbits and quail with low energy cost. Bows are short, powerful, and sinew-backed to handle tight draws in brush. Obsidian and bone points are wickedly sharp and efficient. The ethic is familiar by now. Energy in must beat energy out. Ritual and story carry as much weight as ropes and jars. In winter, the Navajo Blessing Way and Night Way ceremonies braid healing, balance, and community into multi-night gatherings in the Hogan chants that harmonize breath and heartbeat with the room, sand paintings that map a cosmology onto the floor before being brushed away, a reminder that order is constructed and renewed, not assumed. For the Apache, winter is teaching season, tracking lessons, plant medicine instruction, the quiet discipline of moving through a landscape without disturbing it. Songs honor the land and its spirits. Silence is not absence, it's respect, and a way to hear weather coming before it arrives. Safety protocols are specific to canyon and mesa. Don't sleep in a wash, even if it's bone dry. Snowmelt up canyon can travel invisibly until it's suddenly audible and then unstoppable. Camp where the wind breaks but cold air doesn't pool. Respect the night winds that pour downslope like water. Keep a coal bed alive, coals are sunrise insurance. Predators are managed with sightlines and dogs. Herds are corralled with thorny brush. Children learn to read coyote tracks before they learn to braid rope. Tools and repairs happen now, not later. A cracked water jar is a problem you solve at noon, not when the stars feel close enough to touch. Rationing is quiet and gentle. A pot of stew comes back to heat morning and evening. Portions shrink a notch when hunts come up light, and nobody has to announce it. Pinon nuts come out on days when work burns hotter. A slice of roasted agave shows up as a treat when spirits dip and the wind won't settle. Trade is a winter lifeline as well, wool and weaving moving toward Pueblo, corn and pottery. Relationships as real as ropes and just as strong. Maintenance is winter's side hustle. Adobe plaster gets patched on a bright day. Roof beams inspected. Ladders tightened. Storage jars checked for cracks. Baskets rewoven where the pitch has lifted. The sun is a co-worker. You do heavy chores when it's highest. You sit and mend in slant light. You bank heat for after dark. Hope is scheduled. Seed corn is sorted. Tools for planting are sharpened. Stories about spring rains and first shoots travel the room like embers catching new tinder. If the Pacific Northwest was a masterclass in dryness and networks, the Southwest is a masterclass in timing and thermal sense. Face the door east. Thicken the walls. Store the sun. Move when the land says move. And let ceremony reset the mind so scarcity doesn't turn into fear. You begin to see how every winter culture we've visited is answering the same riddle with different tools. How to keep the body fed and warm, the mind steady, and the community woven tight until the angle of light shifts. From here, our path returns to tools and techniques across regions, the cross-continental kit for deep winter. snowshoes that write new mathematics over powder, fire starting that works when fingers are clumsy with cold, lamps turned from animal fat into light and morale, sleds and travois that turn distance into solvable problems. When you're ready, we'll lay that toolkit out on the ground and hear how each piece was tuned over generations until it felt less like equipment and more like common sense. Lay the winter kit out where we can see it on a hide, on packed snow, on a cedar plank floor. Every piece you're looking at has been refined by generations until it feels less like equipment and more like a habit. The genius of these tools isn't that they're flashy, it's that they solve winter's math: distance, heat, calories, time with quiet precision. Start with the thing that changes the ground itself: snowshoes. In the northeast and upper woodlands, frames of ash or hickory are steamed and bent into ovals or teardrops. Rawhide webbing is laced tight enough to support weight, loose enough to let powder sift through. Styles vary for the job: long, narrow shoes for straight runs along frozen rivers, broader, bare paw patterns for maneuvering in tight trees, upturned toes for crust and drift. In plains country, winter shoes widen for stability over wind-formed dunes, letting a hunter glide where he'd otherwise post-hole to his hips. Snowshoes don't make winter easy. They make it possible, turning 5 steps for 1 foot of progress into 1 step that actually counts. Right beside them lies the travois, a triangle of tippy poles with crosspieces that dogs, and later horses, pull across frozen ground. It is elegant in its simplicity: long poles that glide over snow, lashings that flex instead of snap, a platform for wood, robes, meat, or a tired child. Where a wheel would bog or break, a travois skims. The crate or parfleche lashed onto it rawhide, folded wet, dried hard, keeps food dry, tools together, and miles from stealing goods with rattles and spills. Slide a little north on our imaginary tarp and you'll find the Arctic arsenal. The harpoon looks like sculpture until you see it work. The shaft is wood or antler. The head is a toggling point of bone or ivory that slips past a seal's hide and turns crosswise to anchor. A sinew line runs back to a hand or a float. The moment after the strike is a practice dance that wastes no body heat, no motion, no chance. Nearby is the snow knife, long, straight, built to slice hard wind slab into blocks that become shelter. And the ulu, the crescent-bladed woman's knife with a center-set handle, skinning, scraping, chopping, dicing, even lifting thin bread off a hot stone. In a house where fuel is precious and fingers are mittened, an ulu's geometry is the difference between awkward and done. Now, fire winter's smallest, most negotiable miracle. 3 broad approaches cross the continent. First, friction, the bow drill. A fireboard of cedar, basswood or cottonwood, a spindle of the same or slightly harder wood, a socket to hold it, a bent stick with a thong for the bow. Spin, steady, breathe, fine. Brown dust gathers, heats and glows. You slide it into a nest of shredded bark, cattail fluff, milkweed down, or dry grass. You cup your hands and feed it air like it's alive because it is. Second, spark. Flint and steel where trade has carried them, or pyrites with a striker before that. Charred cloth in later years, or charred fungus amadou to catch and hold a spark until tinder takes over. Third, in the Arctic, the lamp, the quillic. A shallow, crescent stone filled with rendered seal blubber, a wick of moss or Arctic cotton. Constant, careful trimming to keep the flame low, blue and clean. It cooks, it lights, it dries, it steadies. You can measure a winter night in the soft edge of a quillic's light. Tinder and kindling are a whole subculture of winter competence. Birch bark peels and burns even when damp. Fat wood resin, rich heartwood lights hot, shredded cedar bark catches like a rumour. In wet places, kindling hangs from rafters to live in smoke until it's ready. In treeless places, buffalo chips dried dung become dense, steady fuel. The rule is universal. The smallest fire that does the job is the right fire. Winter hates waste. Transport is a spectrum from shoulder to sled. We've met the travois. In the far north, meet the komutik. The Inuit sled with upcurved runners and crosspieces lashed, not nailed. Lashings let the sled flex across sastrugi and pressure ridges instead of shattering. Runners are sometimes iced to a glassy hardness for glide, a detail that seems small until you count miles by dog breath and boot steps. Even on the coast, canoes are part of the winter kit, pulled high under eaves, oiled and ready for a flat water day when a river returns to itself between storms. A boat out of service is a story of lost chances. A boat maintained in winter is a promise you can cash the moment weather smiles. Storage tech is winter's quiet backbone. Parfleches on the plains, clay jars sealed with pine pitch in the southwest, cedar bent boxes with tight lids in the northwest, bark-lined pits in the northeast. Each container answers a different climate question: moisture, pests, freezing, rot. Pemmican dried meat pounded with rendered fat and sometimes berries lives in parfleches because rawhide shrugs off wet and travel. Dried corn and beans love a cool, stable pit. Smoked fish and berry cakes prefer cedar's dryness and insect resistance. Mutton jerky and roasted agave ride, best in jars that exclude air. You can read a region by the containers it trusts. Clothing tools deserve their own row on our ground cloth. Bone needles polished slick, awls that punch holes without tearing. Sinew thread split fine so it swells and seals as it dries. Scrapers take hair and membrane off hides. Softening stones and brains. Yes, brains the natural oils are superb. Turn stiff skins into buckskin that bends with knees and elbows without losing warmth. In the Arctic, pattern logic makes the difference. Inner caribou parka fur, in, outer parka fur, out. Mittens are size generous so a pocket of warm air lives at the fingertips. Boots layered with dry grass to wick moisture away from skin. Everywhere the same lesson. Dryness is warmth, fit is fuel. Navigation and signaling are tools too, even when they're made of air and habit. In Uksut, those stacked stones mark routes, fishing places, and dangers in a land where landmarks migrate under snow. Sestrugi wind-carved snow point like arrows if you know prevailing winds and read ridges with your feet when the sky closes down. On the plains, lone trees, coulees and buttes become an index you memorize in autumn so you can read it in February when drift lines change the paragraphs. In forests, blazes on trees, bent saplings and the sound of river ice tell you where you are long before you see it. Repair is not a task, it's a stance. Everyone carries a small universe of mending: sinew, thong, a needle, a spare thong for a snowshoe binding, a wedge to tighten a sled runner, a hide patch to quiet a drip. You fix it now, not later. Later is colder, darker, windier, and meaner. A cracked water jar in the southwest is patched at noon sun, not by lamplight when frost has grown teeth. A smokehouse leak in cedar country is barked and lashed before the next squall. A tippy seam with a whisper of daylight is sewn tight before the barometer drops. Hunting kit rounds out the spread. Short, sinew-backed bows for brush and snow. Longer bows for open country. Arrow points from obsidian, bone, antler, later metal each tuned to the animal and the shot. Snares from rawhide or plant fiber sit where trails pinch. Deadfalls are baited lightly when bait is a luxury. Decoys, lures, and blinds look simple until you run the numbers on calories. Hours saved are hunger avoided. And every tool has a winter variant mitt loops on hafts for gloved hands. Bow grips wrapped for warmth. Quivers that shed snow instead of soaking it. Games belong on this tarp too. Hoop and spear on the plains trains aim and timing. The peach stone game in longhouses tunes attention and probability. Throat singing in igloos builds breath control and laughter. Snow snake races in woodlands teach glide, grain, and the physics of frozen surfaces. They pass evenings, yes, but they also pass skills. A winter kit that neglects morale is missing a piece. Finally, rationing tools, measuring sticks for grain, ladles with known volumes, the keeper of stores and her ledger that lives in memory. The rules are clear. Children and elders first. No single day of feast that becomes a week of worry. Broth is not failure, it's efficiency. Sharing is insurance, not charity. These tools don't fit in a bag, but they shape what the bag carries and how long it lasts. Stand back and look again. None of this is accidental. Snowshoes change friction. Lamps change air. Containers change time. Clothing changes how heat moves. Stories and games change how the heart handles dark. Together they turn winter from an opponent into a demanding partner. You show up with respect, skill, and the right kit, and winter will let you pass. From here, we'll move into land management. The bigger system around the toolkit. How people read snow and wind to place camps, rotate hunting grounds, guard water sources, and use burns or weirs to make a hard season sustainable. When you're ready, we'll zoom out from the ground cloth to the map and watch knowledge turn a frozen landscape into an ally. Zoom out from the toolkit on the floor to the map in your head, the one elders carry without paper. Winter survival isn't just about what you hold in your hands. It's about how you place your camp, where you walk, when you move, and which resources you touch lightly enough that they're still there next month. Across the continent, native communities didn't treat land like a backdrop. They treated it like a partner with moods, patterns, and roots. You learn the way you learn people, by paying attention every day, not only when you're in trouble. Begin in the Arctic, where the land is mostly sky and the ground is mostly memory. Inuit hunters don't wander, they navigate a living atlas. Snow isn't snow, it's a vocabulary. Sastrugi ridges line up with prevailing winds. Their sharp backs and soft leaves form arrows under your boots, even in whiteout. The sound of a staff thudding into sea ice tells you thickness. Grey ice hums danger. Blue-white rings promise a safer step. Families build windbreaks of snow around camp at an angle, not straight on, so gusts deflect rather than stack. Inukshuk markers, human-like stone cairns, don't just point the way. They encode purpose. This way to a haul-out, that pile to a good crossing, that cluster to a fishing ridge under the ice. Knowledge isn't a secret. It's a safety net that everyone tends. Water up here is often frozen, but it still has habits. Seal breathing holes form in predictable places where currents keep ice thinner, so a hunter reads tides and wind before he ever lifts a harpoon. When a storm is brewing, families bank igloos with fresh snow, secure sled lashings, and move dogs to the lee. Fuel is inventory. Blubber for lamps, not for roaring fires. Food is a route. If seals are light, shift to char. If char slow, hunt caribou along wind. Scoured ridges where the snow is shallow and hooves can pour through. Rotation isn't theory. It's lunch. Slide to the Great Plains, where the map is wind and grass, and the way river valleys curl like sleeping animals. Winter camps aren't guesses. In the fall, scouts read the country, where cottonwood stands promise deadfall, where a bend in the river will keep water open under ice, where bluffs shoulder the worst wind without collecting suffocating drifts. Camp circles go up with doors set away from prevailing gusts. Paths between tipis get marked so even a child can find the cookfire when the world goes grey. Hunting grounds rotate by season and year. Drive lines, game trails, and likely bedding areas are observed, not raided bare. If bison range far, families pivot to small game and snares, saving calories they might otherwise burn chasing shadows. Firewood stacks are planned like bank accounts. Buffalo chips first, deadfall next, green wood last, and only when you're out of options. Water holes are chopped through ice, edges kept clean so nobody slips and headlongs into winter. Storm signs, pressure drop, wind shift, a strange silence trigger routine, not panic. Secure covers, top off wood, trim rations a notch, pair hunters, agree on a return time. The landscape rewards discipline, and the discipline becomes culture. Into the northeast forests now, where snow softens sounds and hardens choices. Haudenosaunee and Algonquian-speaking peoples treat woods and water as managed commons, not a mystery you stumble through. Storage pits are mapped in stories, the one by the twin hemlocks, the pit beyond the bend where the creek sings in winter, so you can find calories in a squall. Weirs set in fall give steady winter fish with minimal energy cost. Lines and nets under ice are checked with routines that keep fingers warm and people paired. Controlled burns in the shoulder season's open understory ease winter travel and encourage the spring growth that deer crave forest gardening long before anyone coined the phrase. Paths are infrastructure. Between longhouses and pits, between river holes and firewood stacks, routes are tamped, edged with brush or logs, and kept free of deep snow. A storm doesn't erase them, it buries them shallow because they've been maintained. Snow packed against the base of a longhouse becomes a thermal ally, just like the plains families do with tipis. And rationing here is spatial as much as numerical. A single storehouse would be risk. Multiple pits in multiple places spread exposure like a good investment. Turn west again to the Pacific Northwest, where winter falls as water. The land plan begins with cedar, which groves can be stripped without harm, which trees are loners, and which are elders you never touch. Longhouse sites favor slight rises that shrug off floodwater. Plank roofs are checked before the storm cycle, gutters cleared, lashings replaced while it's just drizzling. Smokehouses sit where wind will pull smoke through evenly, not where gusts will flame the racks or drive rain sideways into the fish. Tides are calendars and maps in one. Minus tide days are crabbing and clam days. River mouths have their moods. Fog corridors form in certain inlets and are avoided at certain hours. Beaches that pay in winter clambids, that stay clean and productive, are marked for generations with stakes or cut notches. Shell middens heaps from long use aren't trash. They're data that tell you a place has fed people reliably and might again. And when a smokehouse batch goes bad, sharing replaces shame. You cover your neighbour's loss knowing that the ledger runs in both directions over a lifetime. In the southwest, water is the first and last line of every plan. Hogan doors face sunrise not only for ceremony but for heat. Houses sit on the gentle high spot, not in the wash, because snowmelt can become a river without a cloud in the sky. Terraces and check dams built in earlier seasons are inspected during winter sun so the first melt and early rains don't run off empty. Fields are placed where runoff naturally lingers. Springs and tinages are named, ranked, and visited in a rotation that avoids crowding any one source. Herds graze in cycles, resting forage so late winter doesn't become dust spring. Trade routes, wool for corn, pottery for pinon are social irrigation, spreading risk across landscapes and relationships alike. Risk management is as simple as a spare and as deep as ceremony. A second hole cut in river ice is not a luxury. It's a lifeline if one refreezes fast. A backup store pit hidden off the main path is a hedge against theft or animals. In canyon country, a bundle of pitchwood is as valuable as jerky. Both get checked before sundown. Across regions, storm signs trigger checklists. Tie down, double hide, pull canoes higher, bring kindling in, lash sled lashings tighter while fingers still work. Hunters carry enough to survive a night not because they plan to, but because the land sometimes has plans of its own. Teaching keeps all this alive. Children learn to hear ice with a tap, to read sastrugi under their feet, to notice how one cottonwood stand always collects wind-blown branches while another doesn't. They play games that sneak in math. How many meals left in this pit if we eat this much? Which path home if fog wraps the beach? Stories store geographies. A trickster tale that hinges on a certain bend of river. A creation story tied to a hill that also happens to be the best windbreak for a March camp. And there's a larger ethic running through every region. Take what keeps the system alive. In forests, controlled burns. On rivers, weirs that let fish pass. On the plains, rotating hunts and leaving herds room to grow. In deserts, resting fields and managing herds to the land's pace. Gratitude rituals first salmon. Midwinter thanks. Small offerings to the sea aren't just poetry. They are behavioral technology, keeping people inside feedback loops that favor restraint over extraction. Maintenance turns knowledge into habit. A sled runner is re-iced before it squeals. A birch bark seam is pitched before it weeps. A roof gap is shimmed before you find a wet bed at 2 a.m. A lamp wick is trimmed every hour instead of once a night. The difference between fine and comfortable is a dozen tiny acts that never become emergencies because they never get the chance. Finally, adaptability is the governor on the whole engine. Early freeze? Shift to under-ice fishing 2 weeks sooner. Late thaw? Stretch rations with more broth and more small game snares. Buffalo drift north? Move camp closer to wind-scoured ridges and conserve travois loads. Salmon run light? Lean on clam beaches and berry cakes? Spring runs heavy? Rebuild the generosity ledger with a potlatch or a village-wide feed so the social fabric stays as strong as the cedar beams overhead. When you add it up, land management isn't a modern idea, pasted backward onto the past. It's the daily practice that made winter survivable. Reading snow and wind-like text, placing homes where heat accumulates, guarding water the way you guard children, distributing risk across caches and kin, and timing your movements to tides, storms, and Sunday. The land never stops talking in winter. The people who thrived were the ones who kept answering politely, consistently, and with enough humility to change course when the conversation did. Picture a midwinter night when the wind has already said everything it has to say. Snow presses the world into quiet. The moon is a thin coin you could almost spend. Inside, a room breathes slow, warm, human. We've talked about shelters and tools, pantries and maps. Tonight is the other half of survival, the one you can't weigh on a scale. How people kept their minds steady and their hearts bright when the sun left early and came back late. Across the Arctic, the plains, the forests, the coasts, and the canyons, communities didn't just bunker down. They lit winter from the inside with story, ceremony, art, games, and the everyday choreography of togetherness. Start in a Haudenosaunee longhouse, where multiple fires bead a line down the center like constellations. Winter is a teacher here, and the midwinter ceremonies are the classroom, timed by the moon. Families gather to give thanks, to name the New Year's promises out loud, to reset the community's compass. Tobacco curls into the rafters. Songs travel the length of the house and come back softer, as if the bark walls are singing too. These aren't distractions from survival, they are survival. A shared ritual calendar is a structure as real as a roof beam. After the prayers and dances, games arrive. The Peachstone game, full of chants and laughter, moving gifts and small stakes back and forth like breaths. Elders tell origin stories, the sky woman falling, the turtle's back because cosmology explains weather better than a forecast when the forecast is cold again. Children fall asleep in the sling between myth and firelight, and tomorrow's work feels more possible because tonight had meaning. Pan east and north to the Arctic, where the sun may not rise at all for weeks. Inside an igloo, the quillic burns small and blue, and voices turn to music. Throat singing begins as a game, two women facing each other, sharing breath and rhythm until one breaks into laughter. It's competition and collaboration at once, and there's a psychology to it. Sound fills a space that the absent sun once filled, and laughter pries worry loose from the walls. Shamans Angakuk carry another kind of light. They mediate with the more than human world, offering small gifts to Sedna, the Sea Mother, or calling on helping spirits in healing rites. If that sounds esoteric, think logistics. Gratitude rituals regulate harvest. Taboos prevent overhunting. Healing ceremonies reduce panic and restore a sense of control when illness or accident shakes a small group. Even drum dances, with their strong pulse and echo, are regulation breathing, heartbeat, community timing up together. Disconnection kills faster than cold out here. Everything that reconnects is medicine. Swing south to a Lakota winter camp in the shelter of a river bend. The tipi circle is a law as much as a layout. Every door faces inward, and that geometry tells your body you belong. Evenings, someone sets a hoop rolling and spears fly through it in practice and play. The moccasin game, guessing where a token hides, sharpens attention and reads like casual probability training. The Inipi, or sweat lodge, gathers a small circle into heat and song, stones glowing, steam washing a week's stiffness out of muscle and mind. You step from a blasting night wind into a dome of cedar boughs and dark. You come back out laughing steam into starlight. Purification, yes, but also recalibration. A reset button against creeping cabin fever. Stories do their work here too. White buffalo calf woman's teachings, trickster cautionary tales, family histories that stitch the present to a lineage. You could call this content, but that's too thin. It's continuity, and continuity is fuel. Follow the rain to a Tlingit or Coast Salish longhouse, where cedar smoke writes clean lines through damp air. Potlatch season arrives like a slow sunrise feasts. Speeches, songs, masks bright with formline curves. Gifts move blankets, carved spoons, bent wood boxes, and with them move status, obligation, and the promise that no one stands alone when a smokehouse roof leaks or a canoe founders. Children watch dances where raven steals daylight or restores salmon to the rivers. They see their clans and crests made large and alive by firelight. The effect is practical and emotional. Wealth becomes circulation, not hoarding. Identity becomes a shared performance, not a private possession. Winter can isolate. Potlatch says, we braid ourselves into a rope. A braided community will hold when a single strand might snap. Down into Navajo country, a hogan holds a different rhythm. The Nightway and Blessing Way ceremonies map wellness and balance onto a winter night in chants, prayers, and sand paintings, whose beauty is precise and temporary. You draw the holy people into colored grains and return them to the ground by dawn. You sing order back into a body and a home. There is clinical wisdom here. The ceremony is long and repetitive in a way that deactivates fear. Participation spreads caregiving across the clan. Fasting and feasting are structured to match what the season can spare. In Apache camps, winter is teaching time. Elders shape silence into instruction, how to read a slope by its frost line, how to hear a storm before it appears, how to harvest a plant without killing the stand. Songs ride the dusk as lightly as breath, but they hang on, and one day a line of melody is the thing that steadies your hand when a rock is slick over a arroyo. Everywhere, art is a winter technology. Quillwork brightens a child's moccasins. Beadwork makes a practical bag carry a story. Adzes carve house posts that speak even when no one is talking. The acts themselves regulate mood. Scraping a hide, splitting cedar, looming wool. These are rhythms that occupy hands and clear the mind of the kind of thoughts that spiral in dark months. A winter day that ends with visible progress, a patch sown, a basket finished, a sled runner re-iced, is a day that carries its own warmth into sleep. There's also a choreography to how people occupy a room together. In a longhouse or teepee, tasks are shared but not chaotic. Someone minding the fire, someone carving, someone mending, someone telling. A toddler staggers through the middle with a stick that is clearly a spear. An elder's cough gets a tea of spruce or willow without anyone making a speech about it. This is mental health designed by culture. Purpose given in small, constant doses. Support made normal. Rest embedded in rotation. Even rationing is framed as care rather than lack. The keeper of stores measures out cornmeal with an old, known ladle, and two families trade shifts watching the ice hole so the other can sleep. A fair rule followed predictably is warmer than a big fire you can't count on tomorrow. Play is serious business. Snow snake races in the woodlands turn physics into joy. Long, polished sticks sliding glitter-fast down icy tracks while everyone yells themselves hoarse. Blanket tosses in the Arctic make laughter and balance in equal measure. Children rehearse adult skills in miniature narratives. A hunt with a dog that is more patience than pursuit. A camp under a table that has ventilation, and a door facing east because of course it does. When they miscalculate, they learn with a smile, not an injury. And that's a gift back to next winter's hunters. Talk, too, is a tool. Jokes are short in the cold, you don't waste breath, but they travel far. A trickster's misfire becomes a reminder to bank the snow higher around the lodge. A story about a greedy spirit Wendigo in the northeast warns against hoarding in a way that no lecture could. Humor is social oil in a season when gears want to grind. Laughter in bursts, in big shared exhalations, warms a room faster than piling on another log. Grief and fear get their places as well. Winter is risky. People die. Communities have rituals that turn raw pain into shared endurance. Laments that are sung and done. Names spoken and then kept quiet for a cycle. Prayers that lift what can be lifted and mark what can't. There's wisdom in this too. Struggle named and framed is easier to carry than struggle denied. A culture that gives you words and motions for sorrow gives you a way back to work and to joy. And threading through all of it is the promise of change. Even in the hardest weeks, conversations lean to when the sap runs, when the salmon turn, when the first shoots push, when the herds drift back. That future focus isn't escapism, it's practical hope. Tools get repaired now for the job that will exist then. Songs rehearse migrations before they happen. Children are told, in the middle of a long night, which star to watch for and what it will mean when it comes earlier again. If you strip these practices to their logic, a pattern emerges. Ceremony reduces uncertainty. Story organizes memory. Games train bodies and minds. Art metabolizes time. Humor lubricates community. Fairness turns rationing into solidarity. You can't throw any of that into a sled, but you can feel the missing weight when it's gone. The woodpile and the smoke hole might keep your body. This is what keeps the person who lives inside the body. From here, our route turns from spirit to schedule. How communities prepared for winter in the bright months, harvest plans, communal hunts, smokehouse marathons, woodcutting calendars, and why ready by first frost was as binding as any law. The stores that saw people through January were built in September with songs and sweat. When you're ready, we'll step into the golden light of late summer and watch abundance carefully translated into February meals. Step into late summer, light corn tassels rattling, berries heavy, rivers low and clear, the first cool nights walking the edge of dawn. Winter survival begins here, long before anyone sees their breath. Ready by first frost isn't just a saying, it's a calendar you can hear in the way a village moves. Watch a day, and you'll see how abundance is translated into endurance. Fields, fish racks, smokehouses, woodpiles, and communal hunts, all ticking like parts in the same clock. Begin in Howdeno Sawney country, where the three sisters are not poetry but logistics. Corn stands tall, beans twine its stalks, squash sprawls wide, shading soil and suppressing weeds. Harvest is a whole community operation that looks, at first, like celebration because it is work that sings. Women lead. Corn is snapped and sorted, some cobs destined to dry whole, some kernels sliced free to dry faster, some ground at once into meal for fresh cakes to fuel the day. Beans are shelled, winnowed, and laid out on woven mats. Squash is split, seeded, and cut into rings that will become hard, sweet halos ready to hang in storage. Children run baskets. Elders tell the weather by the light. And someone in the longhouse starts a pot of corn soup whose smell says, "Keep going." Storage pits are readied before the first basket drops in. The pits lie below frost, bark-lined, dry, capped with tight lids, and a skin of earth that sheds water. They're placed with intention, some near, some farther, redundancy against theft, animals, or a flood. Inside, each food has a place. Beans together for counting and cooking, dried corn in skins that keep pests out, squash rings stacked where air can move. Above ground, racks cradle the last of the season's fish and venison to smoke. A careful ledger, sometimes literal, sometimes the keeper of store's memory, tracks what goes where. The aim is not fullness today, but steadiness in February. Shift to the Great Plains. As grass tops turn blonde and the wind loses its July smell. Buffalo hunts in late summer and early fall are campaigns with scouts, strategy, and timing. A buffalo jump where terrain allows can feed many families for months. More often, hunters coordinate a surround or a swift pursuit designed to take just enough, not scatter the herd in panic. The moment after the kill is when precision begins. Meat is sliced into long, thin ribbons that cold air and low fires will cure. Tongues, hearts, and livers are eaten or preserved first. Fat is rendered into tallow clear, clean and poured hot into waiting rawhide parfleches. Marrow bones are cracked open, the rich center scooped for immediate strength, or saved for mixing into pemmican. Pemmican itself is a marvel of foresight. Powdered dried meat blended with hot tallow and, when available, tart berries. Packed tightly into rawhide bags, it keeps without spoiling, resists moisture, and can be eaten in slivers on the trail or melted into stews at camp. Women's hands set its texture, flavor, and firmness. Their judgment is the difference between a ration that sustains and one that just gets you to the next fire. Hides, meanwhile, are scraped, stretched, and made into teepee covers, robes, and parfleckis. Winter shelter and storage, literally pulled from autumn Sunday. Woodpiles grow not as heaps, but as plans. Cottonwood stacked by size, buffalo chips gathered, dried, and stored under cover, kindling bundles tied and hung. You don't want to be searching for tinder when the first blizzard is already writing its name on the horizon. Follow the smell of alder smoke to the Pacific Northwest, where end of summer is a race with the salmon runs. Nets hang like silver curtains along rivers. Weirs guide fish into traps. There is no dawdling. Catch, clean, fillet, brine, hang. Fire in the smokehouse is a low conversation, not a shout steady, even pulled through by prevailing breezes. The fish tell you when the smoke is right. A sheen turns satin. The flesh firms, never hardens. A finger pressed into it springs back slowly. Berries, salal, huckleberry, salmonberry are picked and dried or mashed into cakes, sometimes blended with fish oil for a calorie-dense, shelf-stable food that laughs at damp. Seaweed is gathered on minus tides, rinsed, and dried into sheets. Cedar-bent boxes are inspected and repitched at seams. Lids must fit true or weeks of work can mold in a weekend storm. Canoes get maintenance between runs, oiled hulls, checked lashings, because a boat out of service in October can cost a week of fish you can't get back in January. Drop into the southwest where afternoons are still hot but dawn hints at change. Fields are terraced, edges shored with stone, and irrigation checks cleared so the last water of the season reaches the right roots. Corn ears dry on racks or in the open breeze, then shell into baskets or clay jars sealed with pine pitch against insects. Beans and squash follow. Pignon season draws entire families into the hills. The air smells of resin and warm stone. Nuts are gathered, husked, and tucked into hide bags, winter's pocket food, with its own satisfying crack and buttery burn. Sheep are sheared if needed, fleeces washed and carded, looms strung. Wool moves under smart hands, into blankets that will be wages, gifts, trade goods, and insulation when nights turn hard. Agave hearts, roasted in earth ovens, dry into sweet slices that can turn a thin stew into a meal that comforts as much as it fills. Pottery is inspected for hairline cracks. Baskets get new pitch. Water jars are tested because a leak in December is a hardship that starts now, in September, if you let it. Up in the Arctic, harvest means different moves. Caribou are followed for a final run before they're lean. Fish nets under thinning ice take char and whitefish. Seal hunting shifts with daylight. Blubber rendering is a controlled, necessary mess turned into clean lamp fuel and cooking fat, a winter currency stored in skin bags and stone basins. Sleds komutik are relashed, runners re-iced to a glass-smooth glide. Spare lashings are braided and coiled, toggles carved, boot soles re-waxed, parkas checked at every seam. A small tear now is a crisis later when a wind with teeth finds it. Even dogs are on the schedule, fed to put on the right kind of weight for cold work, paws checked and toughened, harnesses mended. Across regions, wood is a calendar line of its own. You cut and split when sap is low and days are dry. You stack with airspace because rotten cores masquerade as full cords. In wet climates, wood is roofed. In dry ones, it's shaded to prevent sun checking. Kindling isn't an afterthought. It's an inventory that lives in bundles under eaves and rafters. Smoke, dried to reliability. Fires that start on the first spark in December were harvested in August with forethought and stacked with craft. Schedules crank into place almost on their own because everyone knows their lane. Hunters, scout routes and reed herds. Fishers build and set weirs. Foragers fan out by habitat and season. Makers turn raw into ready needles sharpened, snares braided, bowstrings twisted, awls polished, lamp wicks collected and stored dry. Children learn the names of almost time. The day the corn rattles just so. The tide that opens the clam flats like a book. The star that means the salmon are thinking of turning. The wind that moves dust from one ridge to another in a way that says, bundle the herbs now. Communal labour has choreography that kills waste. Butchering sites are chosen for drainage and breeze. Drying racks rise where smoke pulls clean. Pathways keep traffic from kicking dirt into curing meat or fish. Tools stage where hands will reach for them without pause. A single person out of place doubles someone else's steps. The community keeps the dance tight because time is the one luxury you can't store. Ritual wraps the practical in meaning that compels consistency. First fruits and first fish are offered with thanks behavioral tech that reduces greed at precisely the moment abundance could make people sloppy. Work songs carry timing for repetitive tasks. Prayer at dawn names the day's jobs. Evening stories review what went right and what needs fixing tomorrow. None of this slows the work. It keeps morale high and errors low. Trade completes the picture. The plains exchange pemmican and hides for metal points or kettles. The Southwest swaps wool and blankets for corn or pottery. Northwest families trade surplus fish for mountain meat or tools. Northeastern confederacies circulate goods and news with the same routes that carry diplomacy. Trade is not just luxury, it's insurance. If your smokehouse batch sours or a storm spooks the herd, someone else's good fortune can fill your gap because you filled theirs last season. Safety planning gets written into the barn notes of memory. If the first frost arrives early, ration sooner. If birds go quiet and the sky flattens, pull extra wood even if you think you have enough. If a river drops fast, it may rise fast. Move canoe racks higher. Make a second ice hole when the first is wide, not when it's a trap. Stash a small cache off the main path. These are not hypotheticals. They're rules spun from winters that taught hard lessons and communities that chose to remember. And then, the wheel clicks. The last fish hang gleaming. Pits are capped and disguised. Wood is stacked with the pride of a carpenter's square. Tools gleam with oil. Clothes are mended, fur brushed, sinew lines coiled. A longhouse breathes easier with full lofts. A tippy circle looks like a fortress even before the wind piles snow against its base. A Hogan's doorway frames a sun that will be as warm as it's going to be for a while. People sit with bowls of new soup and old stories, and the mood isn't fear, it's readiness. Winter can come when it's ready. So are they. From this golden edge of the year, we'll walk into the lean stretch where rationing becomes art ladles measure out tomorrow without stealing from today. Firewood turns to a rhythm you can keep by heart, and enough shifts, shape but never vanishes. When you're ready, we'll step across first frost and listen to the steady music of a well-planned winter. First frost has come and gone. The wood is stacked, the pits are sealed, the smokehouses stand quiet except for a cautious thin fire on damp days. Now the season becomes a ledger. You balance every sunrise. Calories to work, work to warmth, warmth to sleep, sleep back to strength. Winter, in its middle chapters, is less spectacle and more disciplined, small bowls measured right. Fires sized to the task. Footsteps chosen for safety rather than speed. When the world narrows, the mind widens. That's how people made it through the lean months. Rationing with care, meeting danger with procedure, and flexing when plans met real weather. Begin at a Haudenosaunee hearth in the northeast. A keeper of stores, often an elder woman, works with a known ladle and an older memory. Cornmeal porridge is portioned so that everyone eats, and tomorrow still has a chance. Beans come out in handfuls set by the season's length. Dried squash rings simmer into sweetness without emptying the rack. Meat smoked venison. Fish punctuates meals like commas rather than periods. Children and elders eat first. Workers eat next. A hunter who comes back empty still eats, because tomorrow needs his legs. Even the fire is rationed. The smallest flame that cooks and warms is the right one. Vents open just enough to draw. Damp mats dry above the line of smoke. Waste is the one luxury no one can afford, and the culture treats waste like a breach of trust rather than a personal quirk. Risk lives outside the door, so safety becomes choreography. In storms, paths between longhouse, woodpile, and store pits are marked with brush and stakes, tamped to ice so a foot won't plunge through. Ice fishing follows a protocol that could be recited in sleep. Tap, listen, cut, clear, pair up, never linger wet-handed, never walk the thin sound that sings instead of thuds. If a whiteout hits, people don't try to make it. They stop, shelter in place, or dig into drifts where trapped air insulates. Tools routine themselves into pockets, tinder, striker, a spare mitten liner, because blizzards don't wait for, "I'll be right back." On the Great Plains, rationing tastes like pemmican and bone broth. A parfleche opens. A slice the width of 2 fingers lands in a bowl and meets hot water, marrow, and a few dried choke cherries. The soup is thin by design, a delivery system for fat and protein that coaxes heat back into cold bodies without raiding the future. Firewood is a rotation. Buffalo chips first for cooking, then deadfall, green wood only when the circle gets tight. Water is chopped carefully from a river hole kept clean and edged, because one fall into the drink in January can steal a camp's strength for a week. Hunting is a math problem done with the wind in your face. If the snow is drifted high and the herd is far, snares for rabbits and prairie dogs suddenly become the smarter choice. Pride bows to arithmetic. Plains, storms are drama and danger at once. You plan for the sudden by agreeing on routes and return times, by pairing hunters, by carrying that tiny world in a bag, pemmican, tinder, awl, sinew, a thong for a snowshoe binding. Typists banked with snow turn into quiet fortresses. Paths flagged between doorways let even a half-blind trot to a friend's fire. If covers flap, they're relashed before the sky lowers. If a seam whispers daylight, it's sown now, in calm, not later, when cold hands fumble and stories turn to accidents. Far north, inside an igloo, rationing is science done with a lamp. The quillick's wick is trimmed to an edge of blue, bright enough to cook, dim enough to spare blubber. Meat and fat are measured with precision because the body runs on fat here the way a sled runs on runners. Efficiency matters more than romance. Raw and frozen foods carry vitamins you can't boil away. A piece of seal liver chewed slowly is winter's orange. Hunts target what the day will give. Seals at breathing holes when wind and light align. Caribou when crusted snow keeps their hooves from digging. Fish through ice when tides and cracks say yes. If one family's luck sours, another shares. That isn't charity. It's a kind of escrow. The understanding that winter deals cards unevenly, and the only winning strategy is to stay in the game together. Arctic danger is measured by invisible lines, the difference between blue-white ice and the grey hum that lies. Hunters move along routes they trust, read sastrugi-like text, and stop when the world goes blank. Emergency shelters are not exotic. They're a practiced fold of blocks and drifts, a lamp lit low, a night survived with stories told softly to keep fear from taking more heat than the air does. Gear repairs happen the moment a fray appears, because a torn mitten is a frostbite argument you don't want to have. Along the Pacific Northwest coast, rationing is less about how much and more about how long. Smoked salmon is sliced thin and paired with seaweed broth or berry cakes, so the palate stays interested while the stores stay steady. Shellfish harvests at low tide punctuate the week with fresh protein that preserves the cedar box reserves. Wood is kept dry by architecture, not hope. Roofs are checked after any unforgiving wind, and leak repairs happen now, not when mold leaves its first green sentence on the wall. Canoe travel slips into weather windows rather than schedules hug shore. Red tide, wait-out squalls with paddles stowed, and bodies wrapped in cedar bark capes that drip dry by the hearth later. A failed smokehouse batch is a community problem. Potlatch logic flips on in miniature. Those with surplus circulate it. The ledger of gifts and obligations keeps bellies full and alliances warm. In the southwest, rationing counts water as carefully as food. Clay jars are tested daily by feel. Pitch is touched up the day a seam thinks about leaking. Cornmeal goes by ladle, mutton by spoon, pinion nuts by workday, more on days of heavy labour, fewer when the wind holds everyone close. Fires are small, accurate, and placed so stone or earth reflects heat back into the room. Nights bite hard, mornings warm slowly. Hogans and wiki-ups trap and release sun-like batteries. Doors open east for light and morale. Safety is a map in relief. Don't sleep in washes. Don't camp where cold air pools. Use rock faces to bounce heat and block wind. If a pot cracks, it's patched at noon. If a loom loosens, wedges go in before sunset. A winter of maintenance is a summer of leisure. A winter of later is a spring of loss. Across regions, adaptation is the hinge on which rationing and risk swing. Early freeze, under ice nets, go in 2 weeks sooner. Rations tighten by a ladle notch. Snares multiply along rabbit runs that now edge down to brushier paths. Late thaw, bone broth stretches meals longer, and community meals replace individual fires to consolidate heat and spirits. Herds shift. Scouts adjust routes to wind-scoured ridges where buffalo can still pour through. Small game takes pressure off pride hunts. Salmon run light. Clams and cockles shoulder the gap. Berry cakes come out of cedar boxes with a little more ceremony and a little more gratitude. A smokehouse leak? The day's work becomes repair now, not we'll fix it after the storm. Flexibility is not a plan B, it's the plan. Health and morale are rationed as deliberately as food. Teas spruce needle in forests, juniper in deserts spread warmth to the edges of the room, and clear stubborn lungs. Sweats and steams reset bodies that have been stuck in a crouch by the fire too long. Story is dosed every evening. A trickster tale for humour, a lineage story for continuity, a practical how we beat the bad storm of my youth for skill. Games wrap training in joy. Laughter is budgeted in a sense you make sure it's present every day so tightness never turns into brittleness. And under everything, risk is shared. The safety net is not an institution, it's a habit. Share a ladle from your pit now, and the village will carry your sled through a drift later. Take in a widow's woodpile today, and your broken snowshoe gets a silent swap from a neighbour tomorrow. Winter's economy is not transactional. It's mutual by default. That's why communities made it when individuals would have failed. The ledger of kindness runs across years, and the interest is survival. By the time the first real thaw signs whisper the drip at noon from a longhouse eve, the river sounding different under ice. The desert wind softening at dusk, you can feel the entire system lean forward a degree, but no one rushes. Rations don't jump, fires don't grow reckless. Tools are checked for spring work in the same measured way that bowls were measured in January. The mindset that carried people through the worst weeks becomes the bridge to the next season, careful, communal, and flexible. From here, winter begins to loosen its grip. The next step is not a sprint, but a shift maple sap, rising like a song in the northeast. salmon spoken of in future tense on the coast, caribou trails reappearing on windswept ridges, sheep nosing new grass in Navajo country. In our final part, we'll walk that threshold from hard, cold to fresh work, how communities reopen the year, repair what protected them, and turn stored wisdom into green beginnings. Listen for it. The small drip from an eave at noon, a different pitch in river ice, the way smoke lifts straighter from a lodge and doesn't flatten into wind. That's the first language of spring in winter countries. Nobody throws doors wide and burns through wood just because a birdsong returned. The shift is steady, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Repair what protected you, open what was sealed, and translate winter discipline into spring momentum. In Haudenosaunee country, the year's first sweetness arrives in buckets. Maple sap season marks a hinge between scarcity and growth, and it's as practical as it is joyful. Women and men tap trees with care, no greedy cuts, hang birch bark or wooden containers, and tend long, steady boils that turn thin sap to syrup and sugar. Fires are fed with a new rhythm, hot and even rather than low and conserving. Children learn the palette of readiness, foam, colour, how a drop beads on a snow-cooled spoon. You can taste relief in that first amber sip, but the lesson of winter still stands. Store most, savour a little. While sap runs, longhouse work flips from rationing to readiness. Storage pits are checked and relidded. Damaged baskets are rewoven. New planting mounds are shaped as frost retreats from the fields. Seed corn is sorted 60 kernels here, 60 there, because enough, in August, begins in tidy handfuls in April. Fish weirs, set low in fall, are repaired where ice scuffed them. Nets are mended by firelight as voices drift into plans. Beans will climb here, squash will sprawl there. The trail to the river needs brush, cleared before someone trips with a load. The midwinter Thanksgivings pivot to spring songs without losing the thread. Gratitude is still logistics with a melody. Walk west into the Great Plains, and you'll see winter's circle loosen into a travelling line. Typists come down and go up like practiced breath. Travois poles skitter over bare spots and last snow, dogs pulling with renewed impatience. Camps lift to higher ground where meltwater won't turn paths to sludge. Scouts ride out or walk ridge lines to read bison sign and grass. You can tell a winter camp is ending by the repair energy that bursts in every direction. Snow, banked hides unlashed and aired, seams retightened with warm hands, lodge poles checked for cracks hidden by frost. Parfletches are inventoried. Anything near the bottom becomes travel food, so the new season starts with fresh packs and clean ledgers. Small game snares come in, rebraided for future use. Children practice with hoops and spears in the open, their throws longer now that layers lighten. Bone broth gives way to roasts and stews when hunts succeed again. But pemmican doesn't vanish. It's the reserve that lets people push a day further to reach green country. Ceremonies that were quiet in the cold start leaning toward the bright. Preparations for the sun dance and other summer rites begin in how people talk, build, and rest. Winter's math save, share, repair becomes spring's project plan. North again to the Arctic, where a season can turn with a crack and a shout. River ice breaks up, and suddenly routes that were highways become hazards. Others open as lanes for boats. Igloos that kept families safe are melted or dismantled back into the landscape, leaving little but a clean circle and memory. Skin tents, to peak, go up, light and airy, tuned to travel and the long light. Sled runners get their last re-icing for shoulder season crusts, and then lashings get retied for a new geometry, more gear for open water, less for deep drift. The Quillic lamp still burns, but the wick can be trimmed shorter. Meals can be cooked outside on days when wind is kind. Seal hunting is cautious around pupping time ethics and sustainability bound together and attention pivots to caribou trails scoured by wind, to char in leads and rivers, to birds returning along margins of open water. The repair ethos rules the calendar. Parkas re-sewn where winter's work thinned them, boot soles replaced before wet slush finds a seam, harpoon toggles checked because metal is rare and bone takes time. Dogs' paws are inspected and salved, harnesses adjusted for longer pulls on wet snow and gravel, and the first long sun that slides around a camp without ever really leaving. People laugh at midnight and blame the light. That laughter is a renewable resource. Down the coast in cedar country, you can smell spring as much as see it. Longhouse doors stand open longer. Smokehouses wake for test runs. Nets spread like dark lace along interior rafters, every break mended, every knot tightened. Weirs are rebuilt where storms tore them free. River stones are stacked with hands that remember the right geometry for current and fish. First salmon rituals arrive as expected and surprising. Fresh as tide and as old as the stories that guide them. A first fish is treated like a guest of honor, cooked carefully, bones returned to the water. Thanks given out loud, because gratitude is a management tool that works across centuries. Shellfish beds are tested with care. Red tides and bad water are risks people read with elders' cues. And today's caution. Cedar itself gets its spring work. Bark peeled in long, living strips for weaving, roots gathered and replanted by knowledge rather than accident. Canoes come off their winter perches and taste water again. Paddles ease back into shoulders like they never left. Turn the sun toward the southwest, and the first work is both skyward and underground. Hogans are smoothed, earth plaster refreshed where winter's breath took a bite. Smoke vents cleared, stone thresholds reset. Sheep are walked to fresh grass in ways that rest the land as much as feed the flock. Planting begins on a day chosen by weather and elders. Corn first into warmed soil, beans close to their future poles, squash spaced for shade and sprawl. Water management is choreography. Checks and channels are cleared. Terraces repaired so the first storms don't run off but sink in. If winter was a ledger of rations, spring is a ledger of minutes. Work laid carefully in morning cool, weaving or carving in high sun, tool repair in the slant light. Blessing way songs hum again to set the season's tone, and baskets of seed move like trust from hand to hand. In Apache camps, mobility tightens and relaxes in pulses. Wickiups patched and rebuilt with green brush. Camps lifted to follow game and water. Routes chosen to avoid flash floods that spring can throw like a surprise. Across regions, the first repairs are to the systems that saved the winter. Smokehouse roofs, weirs, ladders, sleds, snowshoe lashings, parfleche seams, storage pits lids, clay jar pitch, canoe gunwales, lamp wicks. You fix the guardians first because a weak gate is a foolish welcome. Then come tools for the next quarter. Hoes and digging sticks sharpened, bows unstrung and restrung, snares braided and coiled, baskets stiffened with fresh pitch, needles polished, awls honed. Teaching accelerates because daylight allows it. Children carry heavier things, try sharper tools, learn why a door faces east and where not to camp when thunderheads build over bare rock. Winter's games become spring's work, with barely a seam between. Trade picks back up on thawed trails and calmer water. What rationing protected now empowers exchange. Plains pemmican moves toward forests and mountains. Wool blankets and jewelry flow toward Pueblo corn or clay. Coastal fish and oil ship inland. Stone, copper, and later iron return along the same roads. Trade is insurance and diplomacy in the same handshake. The partners who mattered in a hard February are exactly the ones you want to see in an easy May. News travels with the goods who lost a smokehouse, where the salmon ran thin, which passes are late to open. Information is a survival item too. Health, after winter's tightness, is renewed with motion and green. Spruce tips and willow buds become teas in the north. Ramps and fiddleheads in the east shock taste buds awake. Fireweed shoots in the northwest add vitamins to plates. Early cactus fruits in the desert offer water and sugar at once. Sweat and steam continue, now for loosening joints more than clearing lungs. People step farther, laugh louder, sleep a little less as daylight lengthens, and watch that enthusiasm doesn't outrun the body too soon. Winter's patience still whispers, "Pace yourself." Spring has a long middle and a busy end. And finally, because a year is also a story, communities mark that they made it. Not with fireworks, but with a steady, collective exhale. The ledger closes on rationing and opens on tending. The woodpile is no longer a wall against fear. It's shade for seedlings stacked nearby. The lamp becomes backup rather than centerpiece. The door that kept storms out becomes a frame for new work fields to plant, nets to stretch, trails to open, ceremonies to prepare, promises to keep. Across every landscape we've walked together, the pattern repeats. Learn the land, enlist its physics, plan your calories, share your luck, give your thanks, and adjust without sulking when weather edits your outline. If you hold the whole winter in your hands now, it feels less like a season and more like a craft. The Arctic taught insulation and light management. The plains taught mobility, circles, and honest math. The Northeast taught storage and forest choreography. The Northwest taught dryness, tides, and generosity as infrastructure. The Southwest taught thermal mass, timing, and water as a map. Everywhere taught that community turns cold into company and scarcity into a solvable problem. That's not nostalgia. It's engineering with a human face. When the first true warm wind knocks the last icicles loose and sends them chiming to the ground, people step through their doorways not as survivors who got lucky, but as makers who kept their promises to each other and the land. Winter didn't end. It completed itself. And because it did, the year can start again, quietly, skillfully, together.